Maybe we can start off with maybe your first reaction when you saw what took place in Paris and how your mind started thinking in relation to this research about really what's going on in the world.
Well, exactly. It turned out that this month I've been working on the article I sent you, and I've been plastering it as much as I can online, the Red Papacy and the rise of Euro-Communism. And that article does get to the absolute heart of the matter of who's under control. But when you started the interview, you mentioned the fact of Friday the 13th, and that's a little bit of astrology. And we always want to remember these etymological and symbolical. We beat that to death in the female Illuminati, getting that across, this year to people. But here we have another prime example that you not just have this atrocity, but you also have it happening on this very strange day. And so if, like me, you want to start looking at the bigger picture, like I've always said from day one, that I'm looking at the higher tiers. I'm not getting lost in headlines. I'm trying to go to the source of it all, and that is these huge tides, that move the smaller events. And one of them is this symbolism. Friday the 13th is important, but really what's more important is, from astrological point of view, and we won't say a lot about this, but Pluto, the planet Pluto, which rules eruption, volcanic, seismic eruption from the very, very bottom, right? So it's not like Mars, which is also very destructive and catabolic to a degree, but by God, Pluto, and I've written on this in articles like Age of Revealing, which people can go to the Michael Tsarion website and look at. We can put links below as well for things, that we're going to be talking about. But in that article and through my work, I've been talking about the movement of Pluto. Specifically now, for the last lot of years, it's been moving through Capricorn. It will continue to do that for a while. And because Capricorn is the sign of stability and order, and Pluto is the exact opposite, it shakes things up. And again, from a very deep core, it shakes things up. So that's what's going on. And the elites know all about this, and they know how to defend against it. They also know how to manipulate it. So, that's the astrological anecdote that I would throw out there, is this whole idea. And of course, you see, the other thing to remember is that the last time that Pluto, right, everything moves in a cycle, right? So the last time that Pluto was actually in the sign of Capricorn was, can you believe it, during the time of the French Revolution?
Oh, wow. I guess there's no coincidence there.
No. And so here we have in Paris, France, this turmoil, this tribulation, and people saying it's going to set off conflict and what have you, and it's certainly a nexus. Yeah, well, interestingly for astrologers, France was the center of the last time that there was a revolution in which governments that thought they would be there forever were literally overthrown, and liberty, a certain amount of liberty and freedom and idealism of the people, came to bear against the structures and against the authorities that existed at that time. Love it or hate it, we're not going to get into the details, but the very idea that the people had a sort of a revolution there. And there is elements of that again whenever Pluto comes into one of these earth signs. And then just again, as to complete this concept, when Pluto was last in Capricorn, it was the invention of the printing press. Now, you said that people are fighting online and talking about and debating. See, the printing press today is the internet, isn't it? It is Facebook. It is a certain amount of this. So there's another parallel there that people may absolutely not be familiar with. Two extraordinary events, which correspond with this Pluto in Capricorn happening. One is the fact of the turmoil itself, France being key to that. And then secondly, the means of communication by which, in an egalitarian way, people, ordinary people, can bring to bear not just to chit-chat and talk a lot of rubbish, which you also get on these social media, but also to learn, to actually read, to learn, and to pick up faster. In a matter of days, people are scanning information that, our forebears had to wait weeks for the newspapers to unravel this,
right,
or the
yeah.
TV shows monotonously to go on like some boring Monty Python sketch, in which some suit and tie just drivels on for weeks and weeks and weeks. Now people are just like eclectically, picking up things, being exposed to concepts that they've never ever could even conceive of learning at such a fast lightning speed, which is really great.
Oh, it's definitely helped me in my journey, and I know a lot of people as well. And I mean, there's a great deal of confusion out there, I think, because you have people coming into this for the first time. They're coming into this awareness as you say, the bigger game, that there's something bigger going on than what's taking place on the political level. I can speak to that also from a Canadian perspective, because we just recently had our federal election here in Canada, and our former Prime Minister, Stephen Harper, who'd been ruling and destroying this country for some time, was overthrown by a new young buck, Justin Trudeau. And, Justin came in in a very similar fashion to Obama when he came in America, with a lot of promises of hope and change. And of course, he's the young guy. He's got a new perspective. But of course, we did some shows recently where we're covering the history of Canada and what's really taken place and who the real power brokers are. Of course, we're committed to the big global banking system. Just like everybody else, we're part of the G20 groups. We're aligned with Israel and NATO and the US and everything else, and we're stepping in line big time. So I think a lot of people put their hope in the political system this time around here and said, oh, well, this is a new guy. He's going to come in and overturn all the corruption in this country. But sure enough, we see, a lot of promises being made and already being overturned. So you make a good point about there being a much bigger game going on behind the scenes when we look at what's taking place geopolitically.
Yeah, and there has to be distraction. So the constant hope is very important, just like curiosity is important. So the elites know that certain things are ontological. People have grief and anxiety, and then they have hope. Like I've said throughout my work, they know the mystery of trauma and how to awaken deep-laid limbic trauma. In fact, it may even go before the limbic brain. I mean, right down into the brain stem, but that's a whole other interview. But the thing is that they know how to awaken that. Our brain, about 30% of our functionings is controlled by the frontal lobe, which means there's a hell of a lot going on that these darker centers of consciousness are in control of. And this government, through its media icons, through its Russell brand of bullshit, or whatever, and again, as you say, the latest icon or the latest, the pop icon who stops everything on stage, the crocodile tears and all these spectacles and extravaganzas, all done to lead the sheeple, where you're meant to go, where you're meant to feel warm and fuzzy. And the last thing that any of these pop stars or media icons are going to tell you is the big picture. Stuff like I deal with in my article. The greater tides that have been happening, some not known even to the West. The fall of the Ottoman Empire. How many people have even heard of the Ottoman Empire? And yet, that is equal to the First and Second World War. When it comes to what's been happening in Paris and all of modern, since the 20th century, basically. Since the 20th century, everything that has unfolded, and every politician who's come to rule the parties. It's the Ottoman Empire, along with the First, Second World War, Bolshevik Revolution, and all the other, stuff that comes with that, So it's horrific, but at the same time, I'm writing this article obviously before the event took place, and it just seemed to gel because in my mind was the idea to explain current events, and then suddenly comes along, a major current event. And the journalists are on the ground running, and again, people can get lost in the headlines. So it became this article suddenly took on a much greater meaning, because it actually does help people to understand who the real puppet masters are and how they got to be who they are. I've been working on that article for a long time. There's elements of it in my Irish origins work and occult history of Ireland, because basically my whole thing has been to track. As a historian or alternative historian, my interest has really been in the background, watching what the West has done, what has happened throughout Europe since the fall of Germany. In the Second World War and the various other attacks on Germany and the Austro-Hungarian Empire, from the First World War and then going back into the 1800s, when you have the Franco-Prussian War. These are the three big events I've been studying. And then the aftermath of those, right, has been the sort of dance on the grave on all levels, whether it's philosophical, social, medical, industrial, you name it, and the fates of America specifically, by breaking the alliance with Germany because of these Roosevelts and Trumans and what have you, and all of their advisors. And so the breaking in the breach between Germany of the First World War and the Second World War, with America, with possibly even Russia coming in there to create a tripartite empire, a benign empire. The German Empire was already benign, whereas the British is extremely malign, all of that. So this changed the status quo of the world drastically. And because it left this abscess, right, then the papacy, as I show in the article, were then able to manipulate that. And they hustled like you can't even believe to get behind whatever remnant was left after the fall of Germany, whether that be communism on one side, right? Some of the patriarchs of the Vatican said, no, I think we like the look of this communism. That's where it's heading, because, and we can get into the reasons why that is, it's because communism, although it preaches atheism, is still very similar to what Jesus taught in the Bible on some level. I'm talking hypothetically here, right? But the way they looked at it was the communist socialistic model that did smack of some of the stuff that Jesus was talking about, right? Then the other prelates and the other patriarchs went, no, 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 no. It's this right-wing fascism model that looks a little bit better to us, And so they had their internecine fights, and I talk about that, But basically what they were doing is they were laying planks over the swamp, over the abscess of a destroyed civilization. Now, we're not just talking about Germany here, but we're talking about the German Empire, which affects the Boers of South Africa, which affects South America, Latin America. All these other places that would fall firmly into the hands of the papacy, you see, would not have done so had the German Empire, and I talk about this a lot for people who are interested in this. They can go to Germanophobia. We'll put the links below, my germanophobia.net site, to brush up on this. And so these planks that were laid over the abscess, that had been created by the Second World War, and then, the next 10 years, there's another key move, through the 40s, 50s, 60s, at every decade, right up to where we are now, there's been key moves, based in this aftermath of the destruction of the German Empire. And this includes an attack on the white race. I mean, I have to say it, the white race, the West in general, Western civilization, has been in decline since this fall of Germany. Now, that's not a racist statement, that's just a fact, and it would be the same statement made by anyone who had suffered this death blow. Now, immigration plays a key part in this decline. So as we've been saying from the outset, the factors that are of focus today, like this migrations or these immigrations, that's just one thread. But you couldn't have the gates being opened, could you, of Western countries, unless those countries had first been tenderized in the past, first been wholly socialized, and I even go so far as to say it's completely communized. Right? So this whole multicultural agenda, which is just a phenomenon of the West, by the way. I mean, there's nothing multicultural outside the West. As soon as you go past, Belgrade, that's the end of multiculturalism. It's a purely Western idiotic phenomenon. So, you have these tidal moves. A couple more I'll throw in before I stop here, but as we move up more towards where our listeners would probably remember, you've got the fall of the Shah of Iran. Everybody's talking about Iran. Yeah, but how many people know that you had one of the most, benign leaders there, a highly progressive man who, for all of his own little faults and peccadillos, was hurtling that country towards, modernization and beautifully, great relations with the West, good commercial, good intellectual, connections with Western lands, until the rug was pulled out of under him by the West.
This was Mossadegh, right?
No, this is the Shah of Iran. He was
right. Sorry, I'm thinking of something.
Kind of a monarch. That's why he gets bashed up a bit, because he was a monarch, but that's immaterial. He's actually a quite benign ruler and a humanitarian of the highest degree. And even though he's a little pompous and a little idealistic, he still was the best thing that ever cropped up in that whole area. And of course, he had to be taken out, didn't he? He had to be taken down. And so his decay, and then him being replaced by the extremists. So he was sandwiched in between the extremists and then the West, the Western capitalistic powers. Or actually, they're not capitalistic, they're socialistic. Then, yes, you're right, he was then followed, you see, by these Mossadeghs, who were open card-carrying Marxists. Because the way that the establishment runs things is that they don't mind two kinds of ruler in the East. One is a communist, they're okay with that, and the reasons why are extremely involved and interesting. And they also don't mind the extremists. In fact, they put them in, right? Because the Ayatollah Khomeini came in after the fall of the Shah, and also in Iraq when the Saddam Hussein was, taken out. Look, we all know what happened there, and that was predicted by people during the early 1990s that this would happen, and it's come to pass now. So there's just what we've been talking about some of these previous tides that are affecting what happened today. We have been warned about it, but those books are suppressed. Either they were before the internet, so, like me, you have to collect them. And there's even wonderful books from ages past, that talk about this. And I try to feature those books in my work, and I certainly read them myself. and we can put links below actually to 2 or 3 excellent books so that people have a completely universal understanding of what we're talking about in this interview, because the Mossadegh, it was a